If you don't want to be still in high school when you're 30, you're going to have to unlearn some stuff. You're going to have to recognize that maybe what you thought on this thing is not exactly what the reality is, or what you learned in elementary school, or what you learned in church, or what your parents always told you, or whatever, doesn't really align with the realities of today's world.
Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast, where we take hard-earned lessons from the mats and convert them into tools for navigating life's challenges. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I am Ryan Hoover, and plans are like cognitive dissonance. You have options if your ego will allow.
Ooh, that's perfect. So today we are moving on to our second Plan A. It's like you prepared, maybe. Did you look at this outline?
Maybe like the first paragraph or two.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, let's see how this goes.
Am I supposed to look at it?
I feel like for the audience, really no. But maybe for you, like at least a quick glance.
Okay. Well, I did that.
There we go. That's what I plan for anyway. On this episode, we are talking about how your brain throws a tantrum when you ask it to do something differently, and what that means in training and in life. We'll discuss some lessons learned from the backwards bicycle and look at the sometimes surprising barrier caused by being an expert. Are you ready to get started?
I am always ready.
You stay ready. You don't have to get ready. I talk to myself all the time anyway. May as well make it me talking to myself on the podcast.
She's the only one that understands her.
No, there's a couple people out there who get me. Like two.
No.
Habits. They fall along a spectrum of behavior, from health and wellness, like brushing your teeth each morning, to exercising daily, and then on to more destructive or counterproductive habits, such as picking up a donut every time you get coffee, or playing video games, drinking, and on to gambling. But one thing that unites them, no matter where in the spectrum you are, is how stubborn they are once established. Sometimes it's not even noticeable how truly stubborn a habit can become, or just a general way of thinking that just becomes ingrained in you. And that's where the genesis of this episode came from, which was with the story of the backwards bicycle, where an engineer created a bicycle that worked counterintuitive, to where if you turn the handles right, the wheel goes to the left. So to turn left, you have to go right. To go right, you have to turn left. And it seems very simple on the front end. Okay, that's a very clear, just one-for-one swap. Just do exactly the opposite of what you intend. And yet, when people would try to ride this, they fell right off. They couldn't even get a single push to go. Why, Ryan? Why is that so difficult?
Because we're stupid. No,
obviously.
I remember seeing this video years ago, and it was wild. Like he would take it out into like common areas and just like challenge people to ride. And I think he maybe even put up some money. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but nobody could go, like literally could not get the wheels to turn half a rotation before they would fall to one side or the other. And on the surface, like, it's incredibly simple. If you should turn right, turn left, but literally no one can do it. And I don't wholly remember, but I think he maybe had his kid.
Yes. So
okay.
Do you know the dates, timelines?
No, I remember it took him a long time, like, I don't know, 6-8 months, something like that.
It took him 8 months.
Okay.
And it took his kid 2 weeks.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, that's just unreal. Like, that is such a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I assume that we'll get into it, but I mean, it's like kids learning languages and adults learning language. Like, the number of times that I've downloaded Babbel or something like that, and then been like, you know what, I'm just too dumb for this. Like, this just does not work.
And that's another thing where on the surface, it feels like it should be very easy, especially when you already have a language established. I already know that this is a table in English, so now I just need the word for Spanish, rather than learning that it's a table and that it's whatever the word for table is in Spanish, and having to learn two things at once. You would think it would be easier to have an established pattern and then just adjust it. But sometimes that actually makes it more difficult, like with the bike.
Yeah. Well, it's, we see it in our our profession with some regularity. Somebody comes in that is trained in a certain system, style, art, whatever, and they've
Yeah.
done it for a long time. And, maybe there's, in some cases, a small change, a small nuance that we do differently than they do. But in a lot of cases, it might be something much, much bigger. I think it is incredibly difficult for people that have trained in something for a long time to come in, and you give them the same problem but a different solution, and it is really hard to have the brain elasticity to kind of navigate from what you've done for years to this new approach. Even if you look at it and you're like, yeah, you know what, this makes sense, I understand why this is, I think this is better. But then, especially if you put a little bit of stress on it, a little bit of pressure on it, you almost automatically revert to what you've always done.
There's a big difference between knowing something logically and actually getting your body to agree with what you're saying,
Yeah.
which we see in the backwards bicycle problem, but we see daily on the mats
Right.
as what we do. We talk about this all the time. What we do is actually pretty simple. Like keeping your hands up is very easy.
Yeah.
But actually getting your body to do it
Right.
takes a lot of time and practice and energy and effort, to where it goes from just a cognitive thought process of telling my hands where to go to a autonomous movement.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's and I know I use driving analogies a lot, but I think it's something that most of us can relate to. It's when you first start driving, everything seems like a chore, and everything seems like you have to give 100% attention to where your hands are, where your feet are, where your eyes are, looking at this mirror every few seconds, looking at that mirror every few seconds, not screwing with the radio, not, having conversation, all those kinds of things. And then after you've been driving for a little bit of time, you don't remember the drive, and it's like you walk into a room, you turn on the light switch, just kind of on autopilot. You don't have to think, okay, I'm going to turn on the light switch. I need to look to the left, find the light switch, put my hand on it, flip it up. It just happens,
Yeah.
And so if all of a sudden that light switch was moved 6 inches, it's going to take you a while before you come in and you adjust your reach 6 inches. It hadn't been that long ago. I switched the drawers in our kitchen, where I had utensils in one drawer and like aluminum foil and things like that in another drawer, and I flipped them. And the number of times that I've opened the wrong drawer to get something is just astronomical.
It's been months.
Yeah.
But even a smaller change, like stairs, for example, if they're off by something like a quarter of an inch, people are going to trip and fall.
Yeah.
It's crazy how small that adjustment can be and how big of a change it can cause, which I wanted to connect. So if you haven't listened to our last episode, episode 23 on micro adjustments, you should go back and check that out. But
Fuck yeah.
fuck yeah. a lot of what's happening here too is these small little changes, especially with the bicycle just getting started, that we don't even realize is taking a lot of effort and can throw us off. It's very easy if you imagine yourself just being dropped on the backwards bicycle, already moving, and there's a turn coming up and it's to the left, you turn the handlebars to the right. That would be easy.
Right.
But as you're getting started, you have to do all these little tiny micro adjustments to find your balance and get up to center.
Yeah.
And your brain just can't handle it because it's gotten so good at doing it a certain way, counteracting left with right, right with left, versus I feel like I'm falling one way, and now rather than my instinct, I have to go the other direction. So we have a hard time dissecting out those smaller parts.
It's not the actual turning part that's hard.
Right.
Like the people in the experiments never even get to the turning part.
Yeah.
Like it never materializes.
They don't get the second foot off the floor.
Right. It's everything that led up to that point, because we're doing all of these things that we don't even realize that we're doing because we've done it for so long. And so that's why I know we spent time talking about coaching versus teaching on a recent video. I think that's the difference. One of the differences in coaching and teaching, is being able to let people come to an understanding of what they're actually doing understand why this is happening in this way instead of just regurgitating or repeating or mimicking what there's some level of that has to be done, right? When you're first learning, but ultimately you want to get to where you understand why this is happening and why this works sometimes and why it doesn't work sometimes. And if you learned how to ride a bike at 8 years old and you're now 40 and you've ridden it the same way for, you know, 30 years, you definitely have forgotten all the little things that it took to get you to balance on that bike to actually get it going to where you could turn the handlebars or not. So yeah, it's my youngest, a year or two ago decided to buy a new car and wanted a straight drive and a stick shift manual and had never driven one before. And my first, I don't know, 4 or 5 cars were manuals, but I hadn't driven one in probably 15 years, And so we go to test drive and I'm thinking, God, I hope I can drive this thing. And really it came back just like that. By the time I was out of the parking lot, it was like I had been driving the whole time. So it's kind of wild that your brain works that way. Now, if all of a sudden I was dropped into England and it was on the stick was on my left, I never would have gotten out of the parking space.
That sounds impossible. Yeah. So you've hit on a few different things. So I'm gonna bring this into a psychology concept called memory chunking, which it's this idea that if you're going to have to memorize a bunch of numbers, it's easier to group them rather than do it in a string. So if you think about how like a telephone number looks, you're memorizing 3, then 3, then 4, other than just, 10 right. straight. Mm-hmm. And so a similar thing happens in our brain when we are moving from something that is a behavior and transitioning to it becoming a habit. And this was an MIT study done of rats where they taught them how to run this T-shaped maze based on cues and different things like that. And they were measuring brain activity and that sort of thing. And what they found out is once behavior turned into a habit, the flurry of brain activity would happen in the beginning of the maze, of the beginning of the route, and at the end, but there was very little happening in the middle. Mm-hmm. So we basically memory chunk what's about to happen, which is why when we go to drive to work, we're not really thinking in the beginning. We have this big memory chunk that our brain pulls up and it says, okay, you're going to work now. Here's the package you need. And you just go. Mm-hmm. And so we don't realize it a lot of times. You got into the car, you went to drive stick, and your brain said, I have a package for that. 1 second. Right. Here you go. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm good to go. But then a small little change, not that I think other side of the road, other side of the car would be a huge change. But even if the stick moved from being here to up here, a small little shift you weren't used to, the brain has a hard time saying, here's the package for that. Let me just tweak this small part.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. I find it all pretty fascinating. And when we put it in terms of coaching, in kind of our space, I think it's vital for us to understand because it can be frustrating on both sides, the coach side and the athlete side, when it's like, I know that I'm showing in this thing properly and I know I'm saying the right things and they are doing something almost wholly different, and I'm looking at it, them doing this thing and thinking, how in the world did they see what I did and come up with this, Yeah. But they're coming into it with a world of, even if they have no experience in martial arts, they're coming into it with a world of experience of how they move their body, what their body moves like. Now they're coupling it with someone else's body, and having to learn any new skill is hard, but having to unlearn is incredibly, especially as adults, is incredibly difficult,
I've been talking about this a lot in classes. Relatively, it's pretty easy for newer people to find their range with punches because we're used to grabbing things, moving things, doing things with our hands all day, bringing it towards us, and we understand our reach better than our legs because we're not grabbing our phones, our drinks, whatever, with our feet and practicing that range.
Speak for yourself.
I mean, I don't know your life. So
you don't know my life?
I know your waking life or your life when I'm awake.
You say weird things.
I know. That's why we have a podcast. Keep people interested. Okay. So, stages of motor learning, which what you're talking about with coaching and people coming in, you've got cognitive stage where movements are slow, they're inconsistent, they're ineffective. There's a lot of cognitive activity going on. And if you're training or practicing, your session should be very just performance based on the specific thing, no variables. Right. And then the next step would be associative, which is where we start seeing movements be more fluid, more reliable. You can start focusing a bit more on performance and results in what you're doing. And you can maybe even start adding some variables. And then we move into autonomous, where movements are accurate, consistent, efficient. Your sessions are result oriented, but also focus on just a greater skill range, even with new environments and new variables added.
Is this where slow is smooth, smooth is fast comes in?
That doesn't sound right. Slow is slow.
Yeah.
Smooth is smooth.
Yeah.
Is what we say, and also what the psychology says.
Yeah. It's not what the internet says.
Well, we have a shirt for that.
It's not what all the gun people say.
I mean, so it's funny because this was what I just summarized was a grid, and it's focused on motor learning, and it was from Physiopedia, which is a new one. Didn't know that one existed. But I was thinking, okay, so cognitive movements are slow, and I'm thinking, no, sometimes people just like full send with their inconsistent, ineffective movements.
Yeah.
But the argument would be that you're not going to move into the associative, into the autonomous as quickly because you're going so fast and you're not thinking and not letting cognition take place. And even if you could do it without thinking, if you can't do it with thinking, then you actually can't.
Right. Well, and that's, I mean, again, we see this kind of stuff in our world. I think a lot of times people do things really hard and fast in an attempt to overcome and bypass their lack of skill.
And we're going to talk about that because ego is fully present there too.
Yeah. You know, it's all a process. I mean, learning is a progression, you know, and if you, I don't care what it is that you're learning, whether it's martial arts or playing guitar, or learning to drive, whatever, you don't start at the end, you know. People want to, you know, that's why people come in and they tell you about this move that they saw on Instagram or YouTube or whatever. And, you know, and I'm like, bro, you can't pass guard. Like, maybe let's chill on the inverted squid to puss, whatever. I don't.
No, you're right. They do. They want to jump to the middle, but you're going to miss a lot. And even if you could just do that.
And look, there are people that are going to have physical attributes that allow them to get by a lot of times until they meet someone that has similar or superior physical attributes that also put in the time to learn the skill, you know, and then it's going to be very obvious that they bypassed a lot of things that they shouldn't have. So doing things slowly with intention to where you have a true understanding of the why behind it before you jump to. I say this in my kids' classes a lot. I say it in adults some, but I say it in my kids' classes a lot. I don't care if you're the fastest at doing it the wrongest, you know, like, because kids are notorious for, you have them do a floor exercise or whatever, and
they just go as fast as they can to get it done.
Down the and you know, I'm like, that's awesome, you're really fast, but that sucked. Like, you didn't do anything like what I just showed. And so you're not learning, you're not building a skill. You're already fast, you know, like, great, congratulations, you were born that way, awesome, good job. It's like congratulating somebody for being tall, you know, like we're skill building. We're trying to learn something new. You already know how to run fast. I give this speech before rolling all the time. You know, it's like, all right, we just drilled all these things for 45 minutes and now you're going to roll for 15 or whatever. If you just wholesale discard everything that we just worked on for the past 45 minutes and you go back to, in this role, doing exactly what you always do solely for the purpose of winning the round, then it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to improve, to get better. Now, you might walk away 8-0 that night, but what does that really mean? Did you learn? Did you get better? Did you improve? You know? And so putting ego aside and focusing on the growth, focusing on the development, focus on actually learning something new should be, I think, the goal.
But that's just it, is ego and truly identity tied up in who you are and what you do and what you believe. When we take this out of the training environment, if unlearning something or choosing not to just be big and smash,
Right.
it's a personal threat.
Yep.
If I don't do this way, if I don't believe this anymore and I have to believe a different thing, who am I? What am I? What do I do? And so you start questioning your reality, basically.
Well, I mean, there's a cognitive dissonance there when your mindset, your mentality, what you have been led to believe is, all right, we're going to touch hands, and my goal is to make this other person quit, right?
Yeah.
Submit.
Yeah.
That's what it is. But then you've got a coach saying, who cares? Your goal should be to improve, to get better. And so these diametrically opposed kind of ideas are in your head, and one of them is almost wholly driven by your ego. One of them is saying, I don't care what that coach said, this dude's trying to murder me and I'm going to murder him first. But the reality is that dude's not trying to murder you. That dude is
also trying, or should be trying,
to improve, to get better, to grow. And if we both go into it with that kind of mindset, the mentality, then that's ultimately what will happen, at least over time. If we both go into it thinking, he's trying to murder me, I'm going to murder him first, I know exactly what that's going to look like. I just saw it Wednesday night in my class in Charlotte. It looks like two people trying to murder each other, and neither one of them improving, neither one of them getting better. So they spend 4 minutes spending a ton of energy, and for what? All based on, I don't want to lose to this person. And if you step away from it and you get a 10,000 foot view of it, it's like, who cares? What does that mean?
Because are you going to work the next day like, I tapped out John in class?
Right. And if you are, bro, like, we need to talk. Like, that's not the goal of self-improvement, or it shouldn't be.
Yeah. So I think for the majority of people, if you're doing it right, and if you're the right size fish in the right size pond, there should be a lot of dissonance and discomfort when you're on the mats, this in-between space of, okay, what I would just do without any knowledge doesn't work. That's not right. That's not the right fit. And then what I do know to work or have been told would work isn't second nature yet. Mm-hmm. So I have to think about it. So you're living in this big gap where you really have to concentrate and focus and fight the old while trying to develop the new. And that's a big chunk of the journey. And when you get past it, once you're an expert, the journey gets even harder as you try to change and make adjustments.
Yeah.
Because things have become second nature, right, and very autonomous. And you're in this whole new level of, this doesn't fit, or this does fit, but I'm challenging it.
Right. Well, and the truth is, and this is, I think, what makes it really hard, is the new information that you're learning or relearning or unlearning, it's probably not going to work at first.
No. Yeah.
And that's what makes it really hard and frustrating. And it's like,
I have this thing that works.
Yes.
This doesn't work.
I just spent 45 minutes on this thing. I tried it once or twice in a row. It didn't work. I'm going to go back to just triangling everybody, and I get it. I understand it. But the reason you got good at that triangle or whatever it is likely that you put in the time to get there, because you started with nothing. Right. And so if I give you one thing or two things, you got nothing. I give you one or two things, then you're forced to train, drill, improve those one or two things. So you get good at them, at least it's on a relative level, right?
It's the kid taking 2 weeks on the backwards bicycle.
Yeah.
And then the adult who's done those couple of things for years. Now it's going to take you a lot longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And the difference in the bicycle and jiu-jitsu or kickboxing or whatever is, during that 8 months, you're getting your ass handed to you a lot, and that can be if you're not constantly reminding yourself of the goals and reframing and you don't have a good culture to cultivate this kind of mentality mindset, it can be soul crushing. It's like
Yes.
I'm in the car, I'm sitting in traffic, I'm like, do I really want to sit here for 45 minutes so I can just go get my ass beat for an hour? Like, if that's the mindset, if that's the mentality, then ultimately it will drive you to either just not grow, to ignore the cognitive dissonance, which is an option.
Yep. Stay
It's
with
it's
doing what
it's
you've always
like what I
done.
what I started the whole thing with in the intro. I have a plan. All right. If I only stick to that plan, regardless of circumstances changing, and I am determined to make this plan work, even though everything around me is saying it's time for second plan A, it's time to do something else, then I'm going to get incredibly frustrated. I'm probably going to not be a lot of fun to be around by the people that are close to me. And I'm either going to quit or ultimately just fail because my ego has not allowed me to move on to something else. Well, it's very similar here, in a training environment where I've got this cognitive dissonance that's saying, look, if you want to grow, if you want to get better, you're going to have to accept some losses, right?
Yeah.
So I've got a choice. I can accept that this is part of the learning or the unlearning, and I'm going to be okay with getting tapped more than I'm tapping people, as an example. But ultimately, it's going to make me better, or I can choose to ignore it and I can tap 80% of the people that I roll with the same two things and be happy with that,
Your cognitive dissonance on plans and changing the plans made me think of studies about test taking and changing your answers. They show that a quarter of the time, students who change to a second answer change it from right to wrong, but half the time, they change it from wrong to right. And there's a weird dissonance between second guessing yourself, but also being willing to rethink,
Right.
so that you can frame it a different way and see what you missed. And a lot of times that pays off, but our hesitance to even consider that rethinking a lot of times is what gets us. It's not just hesitating to rethink our answers, it's hesitating at the idea of even rethinking them.
Well, and
Because I'm
even
sure I was
there,
right the first time.
right. Well, and even there, because you've been told, well, just go with your first answer. Just go with your first instinct,
Yeah.
And so then, now you're also fighting that dissonance because you've always had people tell you, people of authority, teachers, whatever, just go with your gut, go with your first instinct, go with your first answer, whatever. And so you're even less inclined to go against that because you've always been told, well, the probably your first instinct was the right answer.
Always and never.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
They're my favorites.
So we've touched on ego and emotion and identity tied up in this unlearning process, but being willing to learn, unlearn, relearn is what's going to really, especially from a physical attributes standpoint, help you develop and again learn new skills, keep the plasticity that you need for continuing to develop new skills fresh. But if we look at this conundrum of being an expert, we've talked about being an expert in martial arts and learning a new martial arts, but there's still a barrier that comes up if you're an expert in one field or one thing or your job, your profession, and you're high level, high achiever in that field. And then you go to take your yoga class, your martial arts class, whatever it might be, because there's this, well, I'm really good here. I'm really amazing at work, at financial planning, at solving people's problems. Why can't I keep my hands up?
Right.
This guy, he's just got a small business. He doesn't even know what he's doing. He's just here out of passion, whatever. He can't make people hundreds of thousands like I can. How come he can keep his hands up and I can't? This should be very easy for me. I'm intelligent. I'm smart. We tie our identity and our ego into our abilities, and that's gonna bite you.
I think she just called me dumb.
As the high power finance,
I think she just called me dumb.
Can I say something?
I mean, you're going to anyway. You just said a whole lot of stuff.
So in terms of unlearning, either through nature, nurture, whatever, my own beliefs, I, in the early years of my life, associated doing well in school and going to college with being intelligent. And it took me getting about a decade out of college, meeting new people who are intelligent in very different ways from me to understand that that's big old lie.
Well, I think wisdom comes in a lot of different forms. You know, there are people that are intelligent, right? There are people, just like there are people that are tall. There are people that are fast. There are people that are smart. But I don't think that intelligence necessarily equates to wisdom. And wisdom is acquired in a lot of different ways through experiences. It could be one experience that allows somebody to gain wisdom. It could be experiences over time, through life, relationships, work, whatever. Intelligence,
It's a big word that
well,
seems like it should be very clear and straightforward.
yeah, but I think I do think it's more like being tall. Like
Yeah.
you can get
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you can be
Yeah.
more educated,
Yeah.
right? You can not necessarily be super intelligent and become more educated, become more wise through a willingness to set aside all these things that we've been talking about and be willing to recognize, okay, well, it's no different than saying, well, I'm not all that athletic, but I know that there are things that I can do to improve my athletic performance. Well, I know I'm not all that smart, I'm not all that bright, but there are things that I can do to improve on my education, my wisdom. It might not make me intelligent in the way that society views it, you know. Some of the smartest, brightest, most sage people I have ever met in my life, well, I know a great example. I'm not going to say it out loud, but didn't finish high school. One of the most successful people I've ever met in my life. And so I think, again, there's a cognitive dissonance here where we equate a certain kind of background to a certain kind of wisdom, intelligence, social status, whatever it is. And it's hard for us to separate those things sometimes.
A lot of that too comes from defining what intelligence is. Because again, that definition changed for me when I was in school versus now,
Yeah.
and defining what success is.
Right.
And that definition changed for me when I was in school versus what I would call it now.
Yeah. I mean, I've been around people that were incredibly high academic achievers, but I wouldn't have them babysit a plant, and that's not a knock on them. It's just
No.
it's just understanding, recognizing like this person is incredibly studious and bright when it comes to academia, but outside of that, I wouldn't want to be on the road when they're driving,
Yeah. It's funny because sometimes those people are very well aware of it. They're like, yeah, don't trust me with that house plant.
Yeah.
But then sometimes they just have no idea.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think, and you kind of touched on this earlier, I think it's hard sometimes when you are a high achiever in a certain field or whatever, and you feel like either because people have always told you this or you just have come to this on your own, that you should be that way in other things, no matter how disparate they happen to be from your field. I am very aware that I am not good at much else. Like I don't even claim to be good at what I'm supposed to be good at, but I am very aware that I'm not good at much else.
Very certain set of skills.
Yeah. Yeah. It usually evolves around causing other people pain.
To each their own. So what would you say to a high achieving executive level business person who comes into the gym starting to train in classes, and you can see it in their face and their affect that they're really struggling with their identity, because who they are is an expert, a high level functioning executive, but when they're on the mats and the field has been equalized, they're realizing, oh, I'm not at the top of this game.
Right. On some level, it's going to be an individual kind of thing. But I do think as a coach, it's up to us to constantly reframe for people, keep the context in mind, remind them that whatever it is that they're a high achiever in, there was a process there. They didn't go from straight out of college to CEO. It took time. Even if they were really, really good and, the whole time they're thinking, I know more than that guy and that guy and that guy and that guy. it still was a process to get them to that point. And like we talked about earlier with the bicycle, you see somebody riding a bike, you've never ridden a bike before. You're like, well, that looks easy. I can do that,
Right.
And then you get on the bike and what happens? You fall.
Immediately.
The number of people that have come through either our centers or through like some kind of affiliate network or whatever that thought, I'm good at martial arts. I can run a business. I can start my own business. I can, whatever.
Yeah.
You don't see all of the things that it takes to keep that bicycle upright. You don't see all of the things that it takes to keep that business afloat. You see
the fun part. You see them teaching classes and doing what they love for 100%. A living.
Yeah. And so in that case, when you're looking from the outside in, it's like, well, I'm a smart person. I'm a high achiever. What he just demonstrated did not look very hard to me. So of course I can do it. It's like when people tell me, well, this feels awkward. Well, yeah, no shit. You've never done it before. Like it should feel awkward. Right.
Have you seen children try to walk?
Yeah. It's with anything. Like it should not feel like you've been doing this forever because you haven't, And so as coaches, we have to temper expectations for students and for ourselves. And so for the higher achievers that are going to have this, I keep saying cognitive dissonance, but I think it's an important thing because it's one of those things where
it's either dissonance or bias.
Yeah. Well,
for the most part,
it's one of those things where it can be my greatest friend or my worst enemy because I can choose to ignore it, even though I've recognized and I've got this strife, I've got this turmoil, I see things that are counter to what I think I know or believe, and I can choose to ignore it and go about my life, and that's fine, whatever. But that won't change the things that I recognize. They're still going to be there. It's just that I have chosen to not recognize them and do anything about it, And the flip side of that is if I recognize it, I give it some attention. I realize that, okay, maybe there's something here to this. Let me explore it a bit further. And then if I get in there and it's like, I don't think this is for me, or I don't believe this is right or whatever. And then fine, but you don't really know it until you take that extra step and really look at it, feel it, touch it, whatever.
Yeah. The idea that was kind of coming into my mind with that was, the image that looks like it could be a rabbit or a duck.
Yeah.
At first glance, it's the bill going sideways, but then when you kind of reorient in your brain, the bill is actually ears. Well, if you've spent your whole life staring at it and being like, that's a duck. I know it's a duck. It's very clearly a duck. It's hard to see it as a rabbit.
Yeah.
And if you fight other people telling you, no, look, it's a rabbit.
Yeah.
Or the fact that it's hopping or, whatever.
Right.
Looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, that kind of thing. But you can really fight it in your own mind. And it's not until you decide to look at it as a duck that you can start seeing things in a different light, unlearn, relearn.
Yeah. But it's a choice.
Yeah.
Like it really is. And I get it. Especially the older I get, it's like, you know what? I don't want to learn about AI. I just don't. Like I will use it to the very bare minimum that I need to help me be more efficient. But I don't really want to learn about it. Like I just don't.
Yeah.
I'm at a point where, it's like I just want to chill, man. Like
I'm good with what the world is right here where we are.
And but I'm well aware that I'm making that choice and that it may hinder me in some ways. I'm well aware of it, and I'm at least right now in this moment in time, I'm willing to make that determination and be okay with that and trust that you'll learn more about AI and we'll be fine.
That's your rabbit versus duck.
Yeah.
For me, it's funny. My rabbit duck image was having a job and a steady paycheck and a large company and knowing what I was getting and when I was getting it versus being an entrepreneur. Yeah. Well, I'd like to go back to just seeing the duck, but here we are. But
you can.
Well,
put that resume out there.
It took me a year and a half of my duck job, and I was like, nope, time to go the rabbit route. But I had to unlearn what I viewed a job as or what entrepreneur looked like and felt
Yeah.
like to me. Uh,
And see that for me, that's what I always knew.
yeah.
My
Well,
granddad had his own business. My dad had his own business. You know, my immediate families worked in each of those businesses. You know, I didn't know. I mean, I had a real job for a very brief period of time, but it was with my dad. You know, like
right.
so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I didn't know the corporate kind of environment, and so that would be a massive relearning for me. One that I would rather learn AI first. Um,
Well, see, and it was the opposite for me. No one in my immediate family owned their own
yeah,
business. All I knew was working for somebody else, and
right.
I had some extended family that owned a business, but I wasn't close enough, connected enough to
Yep.
see what that was and looked like and felt like. So I was very comfortable. Not only was I very comfortable with the idea of going to work, getting a paycheck, relatively steady schedule, but my mom worked nights my entire life. She went to work around 5 or 6 in the evening and came home around 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And so I, nothing in my field of study lent itself to having an evening job, but I've always felt like that's where I would feel more at home,
Hmm.
is if I worked through the evening and came home, for the day. Not that I sleep really well, guys. It would take a while to flip that for me, but but yeah, so it's what you know and what you are used to, and having to unlearn and flip that is really difficult and sometimes not worth it.
No, yeah, and I think again, if you're making it a choice, then there's nothing wrong with that. If your return on investment you've decided is not, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, that's
Yeah.
fine. I think the problems come in when you're just unwilling to recognize it, acknowledge it, explore it at all. You're not even making the calculation for the return on investment. You're just like, well, that's different. I
Yeah.
don't want it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Well, there's nothing that says you can't unlearn, learn, unlearn again, relearn.
yeah.
All of that's doable.
Listen, I have rebranded in some form or fashion many times over. And I think that's, as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to have that mindset, that mentality. I understand that for a lot of people, it's terrifying. I get it. I do. For me, it's terrifying to think that I have to go in at 8 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
punch a clock or whatever they do these days, answer phones and fire off emails and,
Yeah.
report to somebody that, is probably half my age and is gonna, I'm gonna stop. But yeah, to me, that's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, I've changed my beliefs, religion and spirituality wise, so many times,
Yeah.
and it's hard to challenge and question it. But when you start realizing that there is a dissonance, a disconnect in your life, it's important to explore that. Whether it's how you view what your job should be or what your relationship should look like.
It's the Friends episode where Monica goes out with Chip.
Chip Matthews in high school.
They are, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s at this point, probably mid 20s, late 30s, late 20s, whatever, and it's a guy that she always wanted to go out with in high school. And so she gets this date with him and it's like he's still in high school.
Yeah.
He's riding the same motorcycle. He still has the same job at a movie theater where he's, I think cleaning up or something.
Free popcorn.
And it's literally like she went back in time because he has not changed. He's not evolved. He's not done anything new or different. And if he's happy with that, comfortable there, I don't necessarily see any problem with it. The problem becomes if you don't want to be still in high school when you're 30, you're going to have to unlearn some stuff. You're going to have to recognize that maybe what you thought on this thing is not exactly what the reality is, or what you learned in elementary school, or what you learned in church, or what your parents always told you, or whatever, doesn't really align with the realities of today's world. Again, it's a choice. You can choose to recognize, all right, what I grew up knowing and understanding is not really aligning with what I'm seeing in the real world now.
Yeah.
Or you can choose to be Chip Matthews and, stay in high school.
Well, Well, so much of especially unlearning and breaking habits, breaking behaviors is experience based plasticity. So I need to do other things, experience other things, and moving out of your own group, cultural group, religious group, whatever it is, and experience different parts of life and different people so that you can start seeing what it really is to be like in a different position is important for that.
Yeah.
And we talk about this all the time in the gym and training, where no other part of my life would I run into someone like Buster and interact with
Right.
him regularly. He's 76. He's from the area. He was a truck driver. He's retired now. There's no reason for our paths to cross.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that the other day, sitting in band, because I'm finally back to my horn friend, the little old man who plays the French horn. He sits right next to me because he's at the end of his section. And I was just thinking, like, I don't know. I enjoy being near him so much. And I'm like, there's no other part of my existence where we would have crossed paths.
Right.
But because I broke from one group to this other group and found some commonality there, I can experience what another subset is like.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to like echo chambers and all of that kind of conversation where, it's comfortable. I get it. It's comfortable to think that everybody else thinks the way I think, believes the way I believe, does the same kind of things that I do.
And if they don't, they're wrong.
Yes. It's so easy.
Yeah.
And that's unlearning is difficult. Yeah. It's hard. Even just getting to the place of attempting to unlearn is hard, because you first have to recognize, well, first of all, you have to be able to see a thing that's different than what you have always thought or believed or whatever, and recognize that maybe there's some validity to it, which means, because the flip side of that is maybe what I know is not right,
Right.
And then to actually put yourself out there in an environment that's not comfortable, that's not what you know, that doesn't validate who you are and your beliefs and whatever, and then put in the time to actually understand it, learn it, whatever. That's a not an easy process. It's not a short process. It's not a comfortable process. And generally speaking, humans go above and beyond to try to be as comfortable as they can be and avoid dissonance of any kind.
Well, and I believe it was Physipedia again that called it cognitive laziness as one of the reasons. Actually, no, it was Think Again by Adam Grant, called it cognitive laziness, where it's just, that's part of it. It's easier to just think the way I think and assume that others do too. And everything is fine. This is what the world is.
Yeah.
It's way harder to question your beliefs,
right.
literally your reality.
Well, and two, I think we have this all or nothing kind of approach as humans, like
that was episode 6. We did cognitive biases, I think.
Maybe I see, you see this especially on social media when it comes to politics. You support a candidate, a party, whatever, and no matter how ridiculous something they say or do might be, you feel like you have to defend that thing because you are all in with this person or this party, and because it's easier. It's just easier.
Well, and then, but if you want the person, you disagree with this or that, then you're cherry picking.
Yeah.
Like you can be exposed for your own biases on either side of that coin. And so a lot of times it's easier to just default to one way or the other.
Yeah. It's almost always easier.
Well, he said almost always.
Almost. But the truth is, like, I don't wholly agree with anyone on anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
we talked about this recently.
To think, well, I'm going to wholly believe with every policy position or, whatever, just realistically doesn't make sense. And I have much more respect for somebody that can be like, I really think this person is doing the right things. I really think this party is doing the right things. I really think this company is doing the right things. But in this certain instance, this case here, I think they're missing the mark. I have a whole much greater respect for somebody like that than somebody that's just like, nope, don't care what they said.
I'm all in
I
everything.
I back them 100%. Well, I don't back anybody 100%. Like when it comes to their beliefs, their thoughts, their visions, whatever,
They're still
I don't
a
even back myself
person too.
100% because what I think today might be different tomorrow. Like like I don't.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why, like,
Well, and
sometimes people are like, "Hey, remember when you said, yeah, I may have said that. I probably believed it at the time. I don't believe it now. I think that's growth. I think that's the
right.
way we should be.
We talked about how experiences dictate what we
Yeah.
believe, and your experiences can change, and so
Right.
your beliefs change.
Yep.
And we looked at that with COVID and masks. Maybe you were staunchly anti-mask, and then something happened, someone close to you got sick or passed away, and you
Yeah.
realized, oh, maybe masks are a good thing, versus somebody else who hasn't had that experience, or maybe even the opposite one. That sort of idea. I'm going to bring up one more Friends reference
Okay.
because you stole an episode, I get an episode, and it's Phoebe yells at Joey for canceling on their date. He bailed on her to go out on a date with
Hmm.
somebody else, and she's like, you don't just cancel a date when you have plans with friends. But then the love of her life comes back from Russia for one night, and she questions herself. She's like, well, no, but I made plans with Joey. I made a big deal about how you don't cancel plans with friends. Should I just change my beliefs? And then she goes, oh, I should change my beliefs.
Yeah.
But she still doesn't, because it's hard.
Right.
And it's easier to just, well, let me find a workaround. We'll go out and then I'll go later with, Mike. And so even acknowledge, it was funny to watch her acknowledge, I should change my beliefs now that I've had a new experience,
Right.
but still not changing her beliefs.
Yeah.
And rather than having a conversation with him and apologizing for how she acted before, having this new experience, I have a better understanding, and then changing her beliefs,
Yeah.
she still tried to have it both ways, to where she didn't upset, hurt, offend either party.
Yeah. I think it is, even when we recognize, it's still hard to bridge that gap, to make that leap between what we believe, what we now think, and then being actionable about it. Especially, when it comes to relationships or jobs or families or whatever, because people have this perception of who you are, what they believe you think, those kinds of things. It's like, for me, I think at this point, probably we're beyond this, but I think early on, because of the industry that we're in, people thought that I, had certain thoughts and ideas, because most people in our world are staunchly one way. And I think it comes as no surprise to people now that I play in the grays a lot, because I don't wholly align with anybody or anything when it comes to like politics and that kind of stuff. And when I would put out a post every now and then, I would get all this backlash, because people had, not because necessarily of the thing that I said, but because people had this
Expectation
idea of what I thought or I believed.
Yeah.
And I think it really challenged them to think about their beliefs, their thoughts, or they just
That sounds awful.
called me a whatever, and I'm never coming back here. I'm unfiling, whatever. I don't get a whole lot of that anymore, because I think people, they have a different
Filtered that out.
expectation now.
Yeah.
I
They're
have
coming to your page for you to stir the pot.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's value in that, and knowing who you are
Yeah.
until it changes.
Again, like, it's, as a coach, you recognize, a personal trainer, whatever, you recognize, all right, we're gonna have to tear some muscle fibers to make them stronger. We're gonna have to have them lose in jujitsu. We're gonna have to have them lose in kickboxing, whatever. They're gonna get punched. They're gonna get tapped. They're gonna get whatever. So you have to put them in these situations where they are physically uncomfortable. I think when it comes to making people emotionally tough, making us develop and grow as humans outside of the physical, then we have to challenge beliefs, we have to challenge thoughts, we have to challenge philosophies, concepts, whatever. I'm that kind of person that I could really take either side of any argument, as long as I have at least a peripheral understanding of it. I could take either side of pretty much any argument and make a pretty good case for it. And I think that frustrates people because it's just not clean. And people like clean. People like black and white. People like, this is the way it is. This is my jersey. This is my donkey, my elephant, my red, my blue, my, whatever.
Yeah.
And I get it. I understand it. It's like our approach to self-defense and fighting. It's not easy. It's not clean. It's uncomfortable. It's not boiled down to 6 steps or whatever. It's not McDonald's. You're gonna walk into a McDonald's and pretty much exactly what to expect. And it's gonna be pretty much the same experience at every McDonald's you go to. You're gonna know where the straws are, the napkins are, what the menu looks like, basically what the pricing is, whatever. You can come into my center, and if you take the exact same class, but it's a different coach, you're going to get a little bit of a different experience, and I understand that that's not comfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah. So there you go. Tear muscle fibers, mental fibers, emotional fibers.
Yep.
Rebuild them.
Yep.
All right. I still have about 20 quotes and like 3 books and 5 studies. So I think we'll have another concept very similar to this up soon. But that's our look for now at why unlearning is so difficult. If this resonated with you, share a story with us, drop a comment on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Let us know about something you've had to unlearn. And of course, if you enjoyed this discussion, leave us that 5-star rating, follow, share, subscribe. Spread the word so that we can continue making these podcasts and reaching more people. Join the conversation with us on social media. And if you didn't enjoy this podcast, obviously we want you to overreact, comment on everything we've ever posted, and share the hate. That's totally fine with us. Thanks for listening to Second Plan A, and we look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.